A country that has been America's economic colony for 175 years just declared independence. Canada is shattering the North American financial order with a $340 billion move, and this is only the beginning. This wasn't announced in any G7 summit. This wasn't discussed in any USMCA review. This wasn't mentioned in any diplomatic channel, but it happened. Canada just executed the largest economic divorce from America in the history of the Western Hemisphere, and Washington has no idea it's happening. For 175 years, Canada has functioned as America's economic satellite. 75% of Canadian exports flowing south. 67% of foreign investment coming from American sources. Canadian monetary policy essentially dictated by Federal Reserve decisions. A sovereign nation, in name only, until now. Over the past 22 months, Canada has systematically restructured their entire economic foundation. $340 billion in trade relationships redirected. The largest economic realignment in Canadian history. A complete transformation from American dependence to global diversification. But this wasn't gradual policy evolution. This wasn't routine trade optimization. This was deliberate economic warfare against American hegemony, the kind that happens through spreadsheets and trade agreements rather than military confrontation. Here's what actually happened. While American politicians were focused on China, while European leaders were managing their energy crisis, while global markets were obsessing over inflation data, Canada made a series of moves that fundamentally altered the balance of power in North America. They signed a comprehensive economic partnership with China worth $87 billion annually. Not just trade agreements, technology transfer deals, infrastructure investment commitments, currency swap arrangements that bypass the US dollar entirely. Simultaneously, they established strategic partnerships with the European Union totaling $156 billion in bilateral trade, energy exports to Germany, critical mineral agreements with France, agricultural contracts with multiple EU nations, all structured to function independently of American involvement. The mathematics are staggering. In January 2022, 74% of Canadian international commerce flowed through American-controlled systems. Today, that figure has dropped to 31% and falling rapidly. By the end of 2025, Canadian projections suggest American dependence will fall below 20%. This isn't theoretical future planning. This is operational reality measured in billions of dollars of actual trade flows. Real commercial transactions. Verifiable data from Statistics Canada and Bank of Canada reports. But here's what makes this absolutely revolutionary for North American geopolitics. Canada didn't just diversify their trade relationships. They built the infrastructure for complete independence from American economic control. The Digital Services Tax targeting American tech companies. The Foreign Investment Review Act restricting American acquisition of Canadian resources. The Critical Minerals Strategy prioritizing non-American buyers. The clean electricity regulations that eliminate American energy dependence. Each policy created legal frameworks for reducing American influence while increasing Canadian sovereignty. Not gradually, systematically, with mathematical precision that suggests years of planning. This is where things stop making sense if you believe what mainstream media tells you, if you trust the narrative that Canada is America's closest ally, if you think NAFTA integration created permanent economic bonds that benefit both nations equally. Because what Canada is doing isn't alliance management, it's colonial rebellion. A comprehensive strategy to achieve complete independence from American economic control after nearly 2 centuries of subordination. The strategy has a name in Canadian government circles, Canada First Plus. Most American analysts dismissed it as political rhetoric, campaign promises, nationalist posturing designed for domestic consumption. They were catastrophically wrong. Canada First Plus isn't political messaging, it's economic warfare. A systematic plan to achieve complete independence from American trade dependence while positioning Canada as a sovereign economic power rather than an American satellite. The operation began in 2021, but the intellectual foundation was established much earlier, after the 2008 financial crisis exposed American economic recklessness, after the 2016 election demonstrated American political instability, after years of American trade threats and diplomatic bullying. Canadian policymakers reached a conclusion that changed everything. American partnership was American exploitation disguised as mutual cooperation. The relationship was fundamentally asymmetric. Canada provided resources and market access, while America provided dollars and dependency. The solution required patient implementation, but the direction was clear. Build alternatives, create redundancy, establish relationships that function independently of American approval. Do it quietly, do it systematically, do it irreversibly. Phase 1 involved diplomatic foundation building. Canada established or strengthened relationships with over 30 nations outside the American sphere of influence, not just trade relationships. Strategic partnerships that included technology sharing, investment cooperation, and monetary coordination. The Arctic Council expansion gave Canada leadership over Northern European relationships. The Commonwealth connections provided pathways to British and Australian markets. The Francophonie networks opened African and Caribbean opportunities, geographic and linguistic advantages that America couldn't replicate or control. Phase 2 involved infrastructure development. The Trans Mountain pipeline expansion reduced dependence on American energy markets. The Canadian National Railway investments connected Western resources to eastern ports for global export. The Port of Vancouver expansions accommodated Asian shipping traffic. Physical infrastructure that enabled Canadian resources to reach global markets without American intermediation. Strategic investments that created alternatives to American-controlled transportation and energy networks. Phase 3 involved financial independence. The Bank of Canada established currency swap agreements with the European Central Bank and People's Bank of China, bilateral arrangements that enable Canadian trade to occur without dollar intermediation. Canadian pension funds began reducing their American equity exposure while increasing their allocation to European and Asian markets. The Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board moved $67 billion out of American assets into international alternatives. Each phase built the foundation for what happened over the past 22 months. The activation of complete American independence, the systematic redirection of Canadian economic activity toward non-American partners. The numbers prove the strategy is working. Canadian trade with China increased 47% in 2023. Trade with the EU increased 34%. Trade with CPTPP nations increased 28%. All while trade with America increased only 3%, the slowest growth rate in bilateral history. But the most significant development isn't the trade statistics. It's the acceleration. What analysts expected to take decades is occurring in less than 5 years. The infrastructure exists. The relationships are established. The legal frameworks are operational. Why the acceleration? Because Canada learned from Brexit's chaotic implementation. Gradual transitions provide opportunities for external interference, political pressure, economic coercion, diplomatic manipulation. By moving decisively, Canada creates economic facts on the ground before American countermeasures can be developed. Once alternative trade relationships are operational, American leverage disappears because American participation becomes optional rather than essential. And here's what makes American retaliation practically impossible. Canada controls resources that America needs but cannot replace. Oil, natural gas, electricity, uranium, critical minerals, agricultural products, water. Physical necessities that American consumers and industries require for basic functionality. Economic sanctions against Canada would be economic sanctions against American consumers. Political suicide for any administration that attempted it. Strategic disaster for American energy security and industrial competitiveness. Canada calculated perfectly. They've achieved economic independence while controlling resources that America cannot afford to lose access to. Checkmate through patient planning and geographic advantages. The implications extend far beyond bilateral trade statistics. Canada's success proves that American economic hegemony can be overcome by middle powers with strategic resources. That patient planning can defeat American pressure. That the post-American world is not only possible, but achievable. Mexico is taking notes. Their new government is developing similar capabilities. Brazil is implementing comparable strategies. Australia is questioning traditional American alignment, all major resource-producing nations with incentives to escape American economic control. The network effect is mathematically certain. As more countries establish America-independent trade relationships, American economic influence decreases proportionally. Reduced influence means reduced leverage. Reduced leverage means reduced ability to maintain exploitative relationships. This creates a death spiral for American economic hegemony. Fewer countries dependent on American markets means fewer countries accepting American trade terms. Fewer favorable trade terms means higher costs for American consumers. Higher costs mean reduced competitiveness and living standards. The Federal Reserve cannot prevent this process through monetary policy. They cannot force Canada to maintain trade dependence when alternatives provide better terms. They cannot manipulate the value of Canadian resources through interest rate adjustments. America's only option would be to offer superior trade terms than Canada's alternatives, or to provide genuine partnership benefits that justify continued dependence. Both would require abandoning the exploitative relationship that has defined Canadian-American commerce for centuries. Essentially, America would have to treat Canada as an equal rather than a subordinate, provide mutual benefits rather than extractive arrangements, offer genuine cooperation rather than economic colonialism. American policymakers seem incapable of such adjustments. Political incentives favor maintaining dominance through pressure rather than earning cooperation through superior performance. Historical patterns suggest continued escalation rather than graceful acceptance of Canadian independence. This guarantees continued acceleration of Canadian diversification, more trade flowing through non-American channels, more investment directed toward non-American partners, more Canadian resources allocated to support global growth rather than American consumption. The implications for American living standards are severe. Canadian energy at market prices rather than preferential rates. Canadian resources allocated through competitive bidding rather than automatic American access. Canadian cooperation earned through mutual benefit rather than assumed through geographic proximity. American consumers will discover what Canadian resources actually cost when Canada has alternatives to American markets. Industrial costs will increase accordingly. Energy prices will reflect global supply and demand rather than colonial extraction. The adjustment will be particularly severe because American economic models assume continued Canadian subordination. Trade projections assume preferential access to Canadian resources. Energy forecasts assume below-market Canadian pricing. Budget calculations assume continued extraction of Canadian wealth. All of those assumptions are being systematically invalidated by Canadian independence. The economic models that guided American policy for decades no longer reflect operational reality, but here's what should terrify American strategists. Canada's move wasn't just about trade diversification, it was about preparation for post-American North American order, the continental system that emerges when American hegemony no longer defines regional relationships. In that system, Canada's advantages are enormous. Vast natural resources, stable political institutions, educated population, strategic geographic position controlling Arctic shipping routes and continental energy flows. Canada positioned for that system while America was focused on maintaining the old system. The system where geographic proximity provided automatic Canadian subordination, the system where colonial relationships could be sustained through economic pressure. That system is ending. Canada's $340 billion repositioning proved it. The infrastructure for alternatives exists. The economic relationships are established. The legal frameworks are operational. American policymakers face the same choice every declining hegemon faces. Accept reduced influence gracefully and maintain what partnership remains possible, or resist mathematical reality until forced adjustment becomes catastrophic. Canada's leadership clearly believes America will choose resistance. That's why they moved so decisively, so comprehensively, so irreversibly. They're positioning for confrontational American response rather than cooperative adjustment to new realities. The evidence supports their calculation. American political dysfunction prevents strategic adaptation. Congressional gridlock blocks policy innovation. Electoral incentives favor nationalist posturing over pragmatic adjustment. All classic symptoms of declining imperial power. The same patterns that preceded British, French, Spanish, and Dutch acceptance of reduced global influence. The psychology is predictable. The resistance is inevitable. The final acceptance is always painful. Canada recognized these patterns and positioned accordingly, not through emotional anti-Americanism, through mathematical analysis of declining American competitiveness relative to rising global alternatives. The $340 billion repositioning was acknowledgement that America's relative advantages are disappearing, that the future belongs to resource-rich nations with stable institutions and diversified partnerships. Nations like Canada. The transition is already visible in economic statistics. Canada's share of global energy exports has increased 23% since 2022. Their critical mineral exports have grown 34%. Their agricultural exports have expanded 28%, all while American dependence has decreased systematically. This isn't coincidence. This is cause and effect. American independence enabled Canadian growth. Freedom from colonial extraction allowed Canadian resources to command market prices. Escape from subordination enabled Canadian institutions to pursue Canadian interests rather than American priorities. The results speak for themselves. Higher export revenues, greater policy flexibility, increased international influence, expanded strategic options. All the benefits of sovereignty that America has enjoyed for centuries at Canadian expense. Now Canada enjoys those benefits while America experiences the costs. Higher resource costs as preferential access disappears. Reduced influence as alternatives provide better terms. Lower strategic flexibility as colonial relationships become competitive partnerships. The reversal is mathematical. The adjustment is inevitable. The only variable is timing. Canada's calculation appears to be that American adjustment will be chaotic rather than gradual, that political dysfunction will prevent strategic adaptation, that electoral pressures will favor confrontation over cooperation, that institutional resistance will make peaceful transition impossible. Their $340 billion positioning suggests preparation for that scenario, for a confrontational American response, for economic pressure, for diplomatic coercion, for all the tools that declining hegemons use to maintain control over increasingly independent partners. The infrastructure is ready, the relationships are established, the legal frameworks are operational. Canada has prepared for American resistance, whether it materializes in 2 years or 10 years. The mathematics are absolute, the positioning is complete, the independence is irreversible, American economic hegemony in North America is ending. Not through dramatic confrontation, through systematic Canadian preparation for post-American continental relationships. 175 years of economic colonialism concluded through 22 months of patient diversification. Colonial dependence replaced by sovereign independence. American extraction replaced by global partnership. Canada made their choice with $340 billion in coordinated action. Systematic, comprehensive, final. The question now is whether America will accept Canadian independence gracefully or resist until mathematical reality forces painful adjustment. But the outcome is predetermined. The colonial era in North America has ended. The sovereign era has begun. And Canada ensured they would benefit from the transition rather than suffer through it. $340 billion just redrew the map of North America permanently. The Quiet Revolution is complete.